that all God's people were prophets. Would that God's Spirit were on everyone. Or to put it another way, if only we were all prophets. If only God's Spirit were on every one of us. ... At the end of the ... I want to put, can you imagine what the possibilities would be? This is Pentecost. Pentecost is one of the very few times of the year, by the way, when ministers get to wear red stoles. We almost never get to wear red. So that's why I'm not wearing my new stole that you guys gave me last week. I'm going to wear it next week, but I thought, I hardly ever get to wear red. I've got to do it. Pentecost is an odd day. Pentecost sort of stands on its own. Today is the last day of the Easter season. And in some ways, it kind of starts the new season, even though the new season is officially called the season after Pentecost. Today sort of stands all by itself, and it's a day to celebrate that God's Spirit is on every one of us. It's not an if-only thing anymore. It really is here. Last Sunday at the event at conference, it was quite intriguing. There are a variety of different ways to come into ministry in the United Church of Canada, and last week we celebrated all 4 of them. Usually at the ordination service, they do 1 or 2 or maybe 3. This was apparently the first time in eons that we ordained some people. We accepted or received some people from other denominations, like me. We commissioned a minister. The new minister in Peachland was commissioned as a diaconal minister. And we created a designated lay minister. And so it was kind of neat to celebrate that there are these different ways to come into ministry. And it was also such an important reminder that it is not just those of us that get to wear red stoles who are ministers. It is all of us. And today is such a great day to celebrate that it really is all of us. If you don't believe me, just think of the really obvious thing. If I were the only person around here, or even if Cheryl came back from her sabbatical early so she could do this with me, and the 2 of us were the only people around here who ever did anything, this would not be a shadow of the church that it is. We have people that sing and play music and play the drums, and lots of you who teach Sunday school or help out with Sunday school, some of you who have already gone into the hall to help out today. We have people who greet and who usher and help people find their way around when they're new and they're visiting. We have people who do the slides and the sound. And that's just on Sunday morning. We have people who serve coffee and lunch on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. And we have people who sit on all sorts of boards and committees. And while that might seem boring, if they weren't doing that work, we couldn't do the things that we do. And we have people who give money and who give time and who give stuff for yard sales and treasures for craft sales and auctions. And every person in this building this morning is a minister, and every one of you is in ministry, if not in this church, in another church somewhere. If not in this city or this country, somewhere around the world, you touch people's lives. And you do it because the Spirit of God is in you and on you and around you. And the good news is it ain't going away. Some people think that the reason we do different languages on Pentecost is because I used to be a linguistics student, and I really do love playing around with different languages and hearing them and attempting to speak them and attempting to sing them. And by the way, you're doing very well so far. We still have Yoruba and French and Mohawk to get through, but so far we're doing okay. But I think there's something wonderful about this silly, fun practice of trying to sing, trying to speak, trying to proclaim God's message in another language. It's not just silly, it's not just trivial, it's not just, oh, there he goes again. It's because it's so important for us to remember that God's Spirit helps us to hear all kinds of different stories. And different stories come to us in different ways and in different languages. God's Spirit comes to us through those stories. And if we didn't sometimes wrestle with and struggle with and try and understand other languages, we would miss those stories and we would miss a part of God's Spirit. There was an incredible piece on CBC News this morning about a conference that has been taking place amongst two groups of people. One of them are a number of orphans who were born to unwed mothers in Ireland in the 40s and 50s and who were farmed off into orphanages. Many of them lost any and all contact with their birth parents. They have no idea who they are. And the children were effectively punished for the horrendous mistake of being born to a woman who wasn't married. Stop and think of the stupidity of that, but don't stay there for very long because it's really idiotic. But they punished these children because mother didn't have a piece of paper, a ring. Kind of ludicrous. Anyway, these folks are at the conference, and another group that's at the conference are the ones who are known as the Duplessis orphans. These are people born in the 40s and 50s in the province of Quebec under the time of Premier Duplessis. They were all designated as being mentally deficient. That was the term we used in those days. They were all decreed to be mentally deficient so that they could get federal government money to help care for them. Many of them were never educated because you couldn't educate the, big quotation marks, mentally deficient. So these two groups realized that their stories had a lot in common, even though they were across the ocean, different languages. Many of them had been abused in the orphanages where they were raised. And they came together to share their stories. Now, the folks from Quebec mostly speak French. Very few of them spoke any English. The folks from Ireland speak English. Very few of them, if any of them, speak any French. And so they had translators to help them understand the stories. But at one point, they asked the translators to stop. So they said, we don't need to hear the words. We just need to hear the stories. So they stopped understanding the words that were being spoken, but they heard and they felt these stories that the others were sharing, stories that were, after all, very much their own stories. And without the interference, so to speak, of a translator, they heard the depth of those stories, the depth of the pain that these other folks had to share, and they resonated with it. One of them said, I understood so much better when I stopped trying to hear the words. That's a little bit what Pentecost is about. That's a little bit why we're singing in Japanese and Mohawk and French and Spanish today. It's because God's Spirit comes to us in a gazillion different ways. And it is so important for us to make sure that we're listening for it. And sometimes when you're trying to hear a good story, words just get in the way. Sometimes when people are telling stories, we want to shut them off because we hear the words and we think, oh yeah, I know that. Or, that's just stupid. I don't need to listen to that. Or, I've heard it all before. I don't need to listen to you. But people's stories are something that we always need to listen to. We always need to hear them. We need to hear people tell us of what life is like in other places, what their experience has been like growing up the way they grew up, what it was like to do things the way they did things. It's really wonderful and very powerful in times of war and places where there's been a war to listen to the stories of ordinary people from the other side, because we've spent a long time learning how bad they are. Boy, is it good to hear them tell what it was like. God's Spirit is on every one of us. God's Spirit gives us all stories that we can tell. And God's Spirit gives us the ability to open our hearts, our minds, our ears to hear the stories of others. When we do, we're changed, and we don't like changing. We just don't. So sometimes it's a scary, risky thing to listen to other people's stories. But when it changes us, I'm convinced, always for the better. Because those stories are a way for us to remember that God's Spirit is on everyone else. And that God's Spirit speaks and works through everyone else and through us. So my prayer for all of us this Pentecost is to recognize that indeed God's Spirit is on everybody. If only we would see it. If only we would open ourselves to hear it. Oh, what a story we would hear, and what a story we could tell. Thanks be to God.